Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at something that I bet a lot of you have thought about at one time or another. Can watching movies and TV actually help us learn a new language?
Mm,
And to help us with that, we've got an expert in language acquisition here. So are you ready to dive in with us?
absolutely. I think it's a question that a lot of people have, and luckily there's a good bit of research out there.
Well, that's perfect. So let's just get right to the heart of it.
Uh,
Is there any actual evidence that watching movies or TV helps you learn a new language? I mean, it sounds great in theory, but does the science actually back it up?
There is some evidence. One study, the impact of movie and TV series clips on EFL learners' pragmatic competence, looked at English as a foreign language learners. And they found that using movie and TV clips actually led to significant improvement. Specifically, they were looking at how well students could make requests and suggestions. So, moving from textbook phrases to actually using the language naturally in a way that's more like how you'd hear it in a movie or a TV show.
That's really cool. Sometimes I'm a little bit skeptical of some of these things, but when you actually see the research, it really does make a difference.
Yeah.
So why is it so effective? Is it just about seeing the language in action?
I think it's definitely more than that. Textbooks are great for the foundation, giving you the building blocks, but sometimes they can feel a little bit sterile. And I think movies and TV kind of plunge you right into how the language is used organically in real world situations.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of real world situations, I was reading that this study used clips from some pretty popular movies and shows,
Mm.
like Friends and Frozen, and even Fast and Furious 7. That's not exactly your typical language learning material.
Exactly. And I think that's part of what's so great about it. You're exposed to more authentic language use. So not just, correct grammar and vocabulary, but also slang and colloquialisms and even cultural nuances that textbooks often miss.
So it's not just about, learning the vocabulary, but it's also understanding like how to use it appropriately in a
Hmm.
way that feels natural and culturally appropriate. So I have to ask, have you personally ever noticed any language learning benefits from watching movies or TV?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think most of us have had that experience where maybe a phrase or a word from a movie or TV show clicks,
Yeah.
and then it suddenly makes sense in real life. And actually, there's research to back this up. One study called Perceptions and Experiences Among University Undergraduate Students in Exploring English Language Movies found that students who were using movies to help them learn English, they reported a lot of really positive outcomes from doing that.
Well, that's great. What were some of the benefits that they mentioned?
They mentioned things like improving their speaking skills, expanding their vocabulary just naturally. It seemed to boost their motivation, and even reduce their anxiety about using the language.
That's fantastic. And I think that reduction in anxiety is key. When learning feels more like fun and less like a chore, it's just going to stick better. So it really seems like this approach could be a game changer for people who've had trouble learning languages with traditional methods. And it's not just about passively watching, is it? I know the use of films in the teaching of English as a foreign language highlighted some really creative ways that educators are using movies in the classroom.
Yeah. It's a really great source of material for interactive activities like role-playing scenes and having discussions, and even having students create their own short films.
I love that idea of students making their own films. I think that's a really great way to make it dynamic and fun. But with all the positives that we've talked about, are there any downsides or challenges to using movies and TV to learn a language?
Of course. Like with anything, it's not a perfect solution. I think one thing to keep in mind is the time commitment. It does take a while to sit down and actually watch something and engage with the content. And choosing the right material is really important. You want it to be engaging enough that you'll actually want to watch it, but not so complex that you're completely lost.
Yeah, you've got to find that sweet spot. Speaking of finding the right content, I know some of our listeners might be wondering where to start. you know, there are so many options out there. There's actually a really neat tool called Magic that can help you find suitable content. But even with a tool like that, it still comes down to the learner, right?
Absolutely. I think the most successful language learners are the ones who are really mindful of their goals and who choose content that really speaks to them. The more you enjoy what you're watching, the more you're going to engage with the language and the more you're going to learn. It's like turning something you already love into this great way to learn. And, it's interesting. This whole approach goes beyond just, vocabulary and grammar. It really helps to develop something called pragmatic competence.
Pragmatic competence. That's a new one for me. What exactly is that?
Yeah, it does sound a little bit technical, but it's actually pretty simple. It basically means the ability to use language effectively
Yeah.
in different social situations.
Oh, I see. So like knowing when to be formal versus informal.
Right, like how to, make a request without sounding like you're demanding something, or even picking up on humor and other things that rely on understanding the culture.
Yeah, all those nuances, I think those are really hard to get from just textbooks alone.
Definitely. And movies and TV shows, I think they really give you a window into how native speakers sort of navigate those subtle social situations.
It's almost like you're getting a crash course in cultural fluency, too.
Exactly. You're not just learning the language, you're learning the culture along with it.
So what advice would you give to someone who's just starting out with learning a language through movies and TV?
I think the biggest thing is to be realistic. Don't expect to become fluent overnight just from watching movies.
Right.
Set small, achievable goals for yourself. Like maybe, learning a few new phrases each week
Mhm.
or just trying to understand the general gist of a conversation.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to choose content that you actually enjoy watching.
Oh, absolutely. If you're not enjoying it, you're not going to stick with it.
Hmm.
So, if you love romantic comedies, find some romantic comedies to watch. If you love sci-fi, find some sci-fi movies in other languages.
Yeah, make it your own.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to use subtitles, especially in the beginning. I know some people think that's cheating, but it can be really helpful.
Yeah. Subtitles are a great tool, especially when you're first starting out. You can even, start with subtitles in your native language just so you can follow the plot. And then as you start to understand the language a little bit better, you can switch to subtitles in the language you're learning.
So kind of make that transition gradually.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's all about kind of finding what works best for you. There's no one right way to do it.
Right. And that actually brings up kind of a fun debate in the language learning world. Subtitles versus dubbing.
Oh, that's a good one. I've heard strong opinions on both sides. Some people think you should always use subtitles, and some people hate them. What do you think?
Well, there are pros and cons to each. I think subtitles, especially in the language you're learning, they really force you to make those connections between the written and the spoken word. It's almost like a workout for your brain, helping you to really grasp the pronunciation patterns and solidify your understanding of the vocabulary.
Yeah, it's like having this built-in language coach right there on the screen with you.
Exactly. But, dubbing has its place too. It can definitely make things more accessible, especially if you're a real beginner or you just find subtitles distracting. It allows you to just focus on the story and kind of absorb the language more passively.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's kind of like choosing between, an intensive workout and a more leisurely stroll. They both have their benefits.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So do you have any final takeaways for our listeners, for those who are ready to dive into language learning with movies and TV?
I think the biggest thing is just to have fun with it. Choose content that you genuinely enjoy. And don't be afraid to try different things. Subtitles, dubbing, active watching, passive watching. Find what works best for you.
So make it a personal journey.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a race. So just be patient with yourself and celebrate those small victories.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
Well, it's been fantastic having you here and getting to talk about all this. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It was my pleasure.
And to everyone listening, we hope you feel inspired to give language learning with movies and TV a try. It can be a really fun and engaging way to broaden your horizons and connect with new cultures. Until next time, keep exploring and happy learning.